Welcome to Radio Zena. It's the first time in our life, I would say, of Radio Zena recording something in English. But today we have really the big pleasure and, in my case, a big honor as well of hosting a very special guest on our show. And let's say that over the past 70 months, the investigative team of Josimar, which is a Norwegian online newspaper specialized in football investigation and not only, has been delving deep into workings of a company called 77 Partners, which is a private investment firm. And this work sparked a lot of different reaction across the board. There were some disapprovals, there were some worry, but from our side, always admiration because the investigation was very precise and very accurate. And this is also, let's say, one of the element of Radio Zena that firmly support investigative journalism, which is absolutely fundamental for uncovering truth that sometimes are not the nicest one to hear, but a truth is a truth. And what I was telling today is not important who tells you the truth, but it's important to know the truth. And I decided, and we decided as a team to get in touch with Josimar directly, and I had the opportunity to speak to editor Howard Melness that I say hello to him now. I know he will listen to us. We had a very good conversation, and he arranged a meeting with one of the two journalists in charge of the 777 investigation. The other one is Philippe Auclair, but we are here with Paul Brown, and welcome to Radio Zena, Paul.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Very nice. Together with me, we have Ivano Bozzano that made a huge work of investigation on the investigation, reading during the last couple of days, I would say, all the article of Josimar in detail and also the New York Post. I think everything that was published, I think Ivano was was going through it. I try to do the same, but probably not with the same accuracy of Ivano. So welcome, Ivano.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody.
And we have here as from the technical part, Andrea. Andrea is always there, as you know, is the guy that had the idea of Radio Zena, is the mind of and the soul, the father, the mother, everything of Radio Zena. So, Andrea, nice to see you. And I would love to hear your English as well. So, if you want to say hello to our. Very nice. Very nice. Well, Paul, let's go back to. We have more or less 45 minutes, 1 hour time. So, we have several questions for Paul. Again, thanks for being here. And my first question is obviously who is Paul Brown? And just who is Paul Brown? I have three questions, and probably you can develop it together. Who is Paul Brown? And you tell us whatever you want about yourself and your biography. What is Josimar? And you can probably tell us about your cooperation working together with them. And also, how does it work, the investigation journalism? You know, what was really interesting me, the fact that two people, you and Philip, were on this investigation, and really practically how did it work, and how is the working together, how is the relationship with Josimar when you prepare an article, all these things. I think that just for creating a little bit of environment and to let the people understand who are you.
Sure. So I'm a freelance journalist. I've spent 25 years working mostly for national newspapers in the UK, covering Premier League teams here, going to World Cups, Champions League games, all of that kind of thing. Not just football, other sports too, but football is my main area of coverage and expertise. I hooked up with Philippe because we're old chums from the London beat. He used to be L'Equipe's man covering Arsenal every week, and we would see each other regularly on a Friday at Arsene Wenger's press conference back in the day. Um, I work for Josimar with him now, purely kind of by accident, really, because we both realised independently that we were looking at 777 partners from different angles. And once we realised this, we had a conversation and said maybe we should team up and see what we can find out, because this looks like a decent story to pursue. Um, it first came across my radar in 2019 when 777 bought into British basketball. I'm a big basketball fan. I cover the NBA. I've covered British basketball and Team GB for years, including at the Olympics. And when 777 arrived on the scene in the UK, I think a lot of people had a lot of questions about them, because um, sources were beginning to come forward to me and say, well, who are these guys? Where does their money come from? Why are they run by a guy with a felony conviction in the United States on drugs charges? And why does their website make all these claims about it being their own money, when they seem to be investing the money of others? So took those things on board at the time, but back then it was a basketball story, and unfortunately there's just not the interest really in basketball in this country to have written it. So I parked it for a while, and then both myself and Philippe noticed that the same company were beginning to buy football clubs, which is when we started to get interested. And we looked at the other things they were buying too, and we realised that they were buying into the aviation sphere. They signed a big deal with Boeing to supply planes, and they got in on two low budget carriers, one in Canada and one in Australia. And we thought, all of this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense from the outside. So we started to ask some questions, and we realised that this might make a good story for Josimar, which is the perfect kind of vehicle to write this stuff. Its editor um, loves to get behind the real story, the truth of groups like this, and was very encouraging of us to ask as many questions as possible. So we formed this team and we started asking questions, and we wanted to take a real look at this company because it was growing very quickly, almost too quickly for it to be organic, and yet everyone we spoke to had questions and more questions and question marks about the company itself, the character of the people behind it, where the money was coming from, and whether this was sustainable. So that's in a nutshell where this all began.
Okay, very, very nice. And tell us a little bit, because some people in Genoa think, and well, we spoke about that the fact that you are, I mean, I think I can disclose that an Everton fans was pushing you more than other reason. I mean, I think that we, as a fan of Genoa, we would probably do crusades for the sake of supporting the name of the team. And I know that in England, it's well, the attachment to the team is very, very strong. And I was listening to another podcast in which you were explaining very well that this is really a coincidence. So tell us a little bit about your love for Everton, and in general, how does it feel to be involved in an investigation where you are also, I would say, emotionally involved? Because it's obvious, if I would do an investigation on Rome or Lazio, I would not care as if I would do it for Genoa. And that's my question.
Sure. Well, just to come on to your last point first, I think that the emotional involvement here, for me, really is more to do with the fact that the more people we spoke to about these guys and their companies, the more victims we found of the kind of things they were doing. And it's very hard not to have an emotional reaction when you have someone who claims to have been a victim of a scam crying down the phone to you and explaining what happened to their daughter in pretty horrible circumstances. I think you'd have to be pretty hard-hearted not to have an emotional reaction to that. lots of people have accused me of bias and all kinds of things because yes, I am an Everton fan. That unfortunately is an accident of my birth. I am not from Liverpool, but my father was an Everton fan before me and kind of uh, forced me into it.
And was a journalist too, not your
He
father?
was, yeah, yeah. But he's from the southeast of London, where I was born and grew up too. But he fell in love with Everton in the '60s when the
Oh,
Golden
nice.
Vision, Alec Young was playing for them, and later the Holy Trinity. Um, I always admired them from afar. And when I was born, I'm a child of the '80s. I make no bones about it. Everton wasn't an easier choice for a team to support where I live because it was no more unusual than somebody supporting Manchester United or Liverpool because they were just one of the best teams in the country, and it was attractive and it was easier to fall into that. So my dad encouraged it, and the accident of the timing of my birth means they happened to be a very good team at the time. It's pretty much been all downhill and horrible since then, but once you choose your team, you stick with it because it is like a religion, and that's never going to change. Um, on this story, it's it's almost like fate has been kind of reaching out to me from the beginning and saying you need to get on and write this because I had it's touched almost all sides of my life, and that's been a complete coincidence because we didn't know that this company was going to try and buy Everton when we started asking
Okay.
questions about them. That was kind of just the icing on the cake because it propelled them into a spotlight they wouldn't otherwise have had. As soon as you try to buy a Premier League team like that with such a rich history, you're going to make more headlines and waves around the world. And that's not to disparage teams like Genoa, but it brings you even more limelight than you would have had before. And I think it at that point, 777 weren't really ready for the scrutiny. But as I say, it felt like fate was telling me to do this because I needed a project like this to get into. It came at a good time in my life, and I had my big passion is basketball, and I had basketball people telling me, "Who are these guys? You need to ask questions about them." Then I had an old colleague, Philippe, who I noticed was also doing something similar, and as I said, we hooked up and decided it was a good thing to do. Then we find out that these guys are trying to buy my football team, which is kind of crazy when you look back at it. And then on top of that, we discovered that Josh Wander, the one of the founding principals of 777, had been or was about to be voted onto the board of the ECA, and I have a family member who works for that organisation. So it touched my passion for one sport, it touched my actual team that I support, and it touched my family life at the same time. And it was as if somebody was saying, "You can't ignore this. This is something you're going to have to get into for the next few months." And my God, we really did. And the more we pulled at threads, the more things we discovered. And literally every day since has been a complete roller coaster of emotions. Um, I'm constantly surprised by the stuff that I hear and learn. Not all of it turns out to be true, and we have to vet things very carefully before they go in our articles. We never write anything that we can't stand up or prove, and it's one reason why we've never been sued or threatened with a lawsuit by anyone in this entire process. So the last 18 months, we've written some pretty punchy stuff about these companies, and
Yeah, we
no,
read
no,
that.
nobody has come forward to challenge anything that we've said in court. I think that tells you a lot about our journalism. Um, and yeah, it's complete. I have to say, it's completely dominated my life. It's been a project I'm really pleased to have been involved in, and I feel like it's been quite rewarding, and that hopefully um, the right outcomes will develop from this.
Did you have the chance to meet them personally?
777.
Yes.
No, um, and this was a little odd actually. I mean, we've spoken to it's getting up to more than 20 people who either work for them now or did at some point. Um, Most of those people, were speaking to us either on condition of anonymity or from a position where they didn't want the owners of the company to know that they were speaking to us. But at no point have we ever received a response to any questions or reaching out from the actual characters at the top of this company. Before we published our first story, um, we got in touch with everyone who was in it, absolutely everyone, both personally and professionally. We had personal emails for all of them, no replies to anything, no replies to any business communication through Josimar to the companies themselves. And it was only until much later that they immediately came to us through a lawyer, and then we began, communicating with them in that way.
Okay.
I'm still surprised because Josh Wander in particular is known to enjoy um, quite good relationships with journalists, and he's prone to calling guys up and having a conversation. He can be charming and personable in real life. We've asked to speak to him. We've asked him questions, but we've never received a response. And
Okay.
you can draw your own conclusions from that, really.
Yeah, well, let's go there. Let's go there because I would like to know your thoughts on this modus operandi of 777 in the recent years. As you said before, insurance business, a bit gray dark, I would say insurance business, aviation and basketball, football, and then sports. And we were wondering about the liquidity issue because in some article it was stated that they are going to buy the teams with their own capital, not investing any other money, which is a very interesting viewpoint in my view. And in general, to understand what is the type of money that they invest really, because that was obviously, at least from my point of view, an excuse. And how do you see this? How do you see really this? Uh, what is called, and many company diversify the business. No, we know many company that are specialized in a specific business and then decide in one moment of their life to go somewhere else, which is absolutely fine. Um, but in this specific case was a little bit surprising a lot of people, in particularly if you compare this group, so the 777, with the other groups investing in football, and the differences in value that 777 has. It was if I'm not mistaken, 6 billion euro towards I don't know, the City Group or the group of the Chelsea Clear. I think I forgot the name of the of this group. That was more than 100 billion. So there is a big difference. And explain us a little bit in terms of investigation. You said as well we met a lot of situations that were amazingly bad and amazingly touching us as well from the different level, mentally, but also on my heart and on my stomach. Tell us a little bit, really, the story of 777 after your investigation.
Sure. Well, there have always been questions about where the money came from, and there have always been suspicions that they haven't been entirely honest with um, how they invest or what they invest. They made claims which seemed to change on a weekly basis about how much the company was worth right at the beginning, which was one red flag for many people. Um, then they consistently tried to claim that they only invested their own money. That has since turned out to be completely false because the majority of the money they've invested in football clubs is quite provably from ACAP, which is a US insurance giant, investing policyholder money with 777. It's well documented that much of the money for the football clubs came from that well. Um, but even just when we first went to 777's own website and looked at some of the things they were doing, you'd click through to the links on some of these 60 companies that they claim to have owned or invested in, and the website is full of either broken links, or they take you to a place where you think, what the hell is this company actually? Doesn't appear to do anything or have any staff. So right from the beginning, there seemed to be something odd about this group. They weren't your typical multi-club owners. Josh Wander was on record in several places saying that they'd never intended to set up a multi-club portfolio of football clubs. It's kind of happened by accident, according to his own testimony.
Sorry for interrupting. He was never interested in football, I understood as well.
He's
Was
not a
not
football
one of
man.
his
No,
passions,
don't.
or
No, I don't believe he's ever a bit supported a football team or had much of an interest there. They weren't in the football sphere in the US really before these things happened. What they were looking for was revenue streams to invest in, things like TV rights, stuff that looks good on your balance sheet, which is fine. We totally understood that, but they've ended up owning a big multi-club operation, and they claim they didn't set out to do so, which again is a bit odd because all of the other multi-club operators in football kind of did set out to own a multi-club operation. So that was a bit of a surprise for us to hear. What is the modus operandi of this business? Well, we always wondered why you would invest all this money in loss-making, debt-ridden businesses which do not seem to have a path to profitability. Some of them have since gone bankrupt. You can look at Bonza Airlines in Australia. That
also
one,
Claire is not doing very well actually
yeah,
in
people
Canada.
were telling us that these things were essentially set up to fail. So why would you invest your money in these things? And then we discovered that there was a joint investigation being conducted into 777 by the DOJ in the US, along with the SDNY, which is the branch of New York, which has had a lot of success in the fraud sphere, the FBI, the Security and Exchange Commission, and Homeland Security. And this investigation was to do with money laundering. This is why we started to wonder if there was more going on here than the public knew about. And we asked more questions, and the answers have been relayed to everyone in our articles. But this all appears to be coming to a head because it's not just 777 under investigation by those US authorities, it's also ACAP. ACAP is being investigated alongside 777 for exactly the same things, and they are accused in various lawsuits by other creditors of 777 of being part of one large scam together. That the owner, founder, and chairman of ACAP, Kenny King, is in some way the silent partner slash mastermind behind this. That he is calling the
Is
shots.
also in the steering committee of 777, no? So it's part of it.
Yes,
So there is
yes,
a little conflict of interest, little one,
yes,
but
and that steering committee was making investment decisions on things like the football clubs, basketball, everything really in the 777 sphere. So we know that subpoenas have been issued by the US authorities on this already. People have obviously been interviewed as part of this investigation. And now we find that the insurance regulators in the US are also taking action against ACAP. It's been told to wind down all of the writing of new business by the end of the year. And if you own a $12 billion insurance business in the US and you've been asked to stop doing any new business, how is that company supposed to survive? I think is the question that people should be asking.
okay. No, I understand. And for me, this is a little bit the point that probably the question that you ask yourself, you and Philip. I really don't see, and I cannot see. I mean, I was discussing with friends with many hours with Ivano. I don't see the business case. I really don't see how can you decide to enter in a business that is absolutely not profitable. And yes, I agree with you. TV rights, fine. Stadium, building the stadium also it could be a very important business. Merchandising, and I have to admit Genoa is doing very well with merchandising since they started. It's one of the best company in Italy on that. And also selling and buying players. This is also very good business, in particular in Italy, with the so-called procuratori. That are the guys that move one player from one club to the other. But I don't think it's enough to become how do you say, sustainable, no? And that's where I really struggle to understand because I was, as I told you, listening to the other podcast. You were talking about multi-club and telling something very that I like very much. That with multi-club, you don't have quick money to win. So this is something that you get it, but you need probably an investment. You need time, and the City Group is a good example. They have the money. Probably they don't need the money. They don't lose, but they don't win, and they move. They move things. They appear. They are in a sport that they like. But this is not a company, as I said. It's not the game of Josh Wonder that he always loved football and to be in Italy in the football. No, and a company like that needs to invest to get a return. And I don't see that. And that's how do you see this? Because probably this is one of the biggest questions that you ask yourself during the last 17 months.
Well, there's two things. I mean, obviously, nobody has been charged with an offence or anything here, but I did reference the investigation into these companies, and if that goes any further, that might explain some of these things. But none of that has been tested in court yet. However, the simple business case for what this company did really, or has been doing, is that once you reach a certain point, you need to add more assets to your portfolio to attract more investors into the business. So once this business began buying football clubs, it needed to continue to buy football clubs to make itself more attractive to outside investment. That seems to have been the plan here. Most multi-club portfolios need a big shiny jewel on top, a club from a top 5 league with historic.
The Manchester City
absolutely
club. Yes.
And 777's portfolio didn't really have one. I mean, it has historic clubs. It has clubs that have been successful in the past. It has clubs with great fan bases in amazing cities all around the world. But from an investment point of view, it didn't have something like a big. It needed a Premier League team, basically, and this is ultimately why they moved into that sphere. We don't think Everton was the first Premier League team they targeted, but it ended up being the one they went the furthest down the line with. And by the time they had been a few months into the process and slowly drip feeding loans into Everton to keep the club alive, it became clear to us, and people from inside the business were telling us, that 777 needed Everton more than Everton needed 777. 777 needed this for their business plan to work, basically. More than a year ago, 777 held talks to sell the entire portfolio of clubs. So there is one school of thought which says, was the get out here that once you have Everton, you then have a much more attractive ready-made portfolio for, a wealthy state or a billionaire investor to come along and say, well, I want to get into football. I want to own 7-8 clubs. What have you got? Well, 777 have the clubs for you, and here they are. They tried to do that, but failed. Nobody was interested in buying the portfolio from them. And maybe one out for them at some point was to try and sell the whole portfolio once Everton was included as the top team in the pyramid. But unfortunately, things have fallen apart quite spectacularly for them before that could ever happen.
Okay. Ivano, do you want to ask something about ACAP? Because it's one of your favorites.
Sure.
And Paul was touching ACAP a little bit, but I think this is a key. And then we will go there probably at the end. Because it looks like from the newspaper today that the ACAP will put the very famous 40 million in Genoa. So, well, let's start with Ivano. You have a couple of questions on ACAP, and then we go there.
With pleasure. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's important not only to understand where this group come from, and by the way, this is very important, and thank you, Paul, for this. But it's also important for us, at least as supporters, to understand where we are and what is the horizon for us, given the current situation. So yes, the first question would be for you, what is the real relationship between 777 partners and ACAP, besides, of course, the official one. We very well know that ACAP is the main lender of 777. We would like to understand, you already anticipated something, but what is the real relationship between those groups? Also, in the bigger picture of the Lidenol lawsuit, which is something that may concern us, actually, for sure, concern us. And maybe after this point, I will ask an additional question on this last topic.
Okay, sure. So there's a lot to unpack there, and this is quite complicated and messy. So I'll do my best to try and simplify it as much as possible. All I will say is that if the allegations in the Leadenhall lawsuit are correct, and they have been relayed to us by many sources, both inside and outside the company, independently of what Leadenhall is saying, if they are right about what has happened here, then yes, ACAP is complicit in a scheme along with 777 to defraud Leadenhall. A very serious allegation that has yet to be tested in court, obviously. Where things get interesting with Genoa is right from the beginning, both ACAP as a lender and 777 as the owner of Genoa have always regarded Genoa as the jewel in the crown of their portfolio. It's always been regarded as the club that they believe is the top of the tree, the one that they think is the most potentially successful and holds the most value. And both companies have always consistently said that to anyone who has asked. Unfortunately, because of what has happened over the last few months, 777 essentially doesn't exist anymore. It's in the hands of receivers. Josh Wander and Stephen Pascoe, the two managing partners, have been forced to resign, and they are no longer making any decisions which can impact the future of the clubs, on paper at least. Because normally in this process, when a company collapses, it's forced into bankruptcy and creditors fight over the remains. But for whatever reason, 777 has not been allowed to declare bankruptcy. Instead, ACAP is seizing control of various assets that 777 used to own themselves. And one of those is the company, the entity which owns all of 777's football clubs, including Genoa. So the situation is complicated by the fact that on paper, Wander and Pascoe are still the ones who should be calling the shots for Genoa, right? But they are no longer in control of the entity which owns Genoa or any of the other football clubs. It is now under the control of ACAP. And the relationship, we are told, between ACAP and 777 has completely broken down. They barely speak to each other anymore. And that has implications for what happens to the clubs, because whilst on paper everything is being controlled by ACAP, actual ownership has not been transferred yet, if that makes sense. So ACAP has control of all of the clubs and is trying to sell them. It is not interested in owning football clubs. It wants to be rid of them. It's desperate for liquidity. It needs to bring money into the business so that ACAP can stay alive and reduce the impact of its exposure to what's happened at 777. So it's trying to sell assets. 777 don't really have a say in this anymore. So what's happened at Genoa in the last couple of weeks with these strange conflicting statements, one from Vasquez, the CEO, saying, yes, the club is for sale, we are looking for new investment, and the other statements from the other companies who still actually own the entity saying, no, it's not for sale, smack to me of this breakdown in the relationship between the two companies. But that's just my interpretation from the outside. The Leadenhall case. Where this gets more complicated is, and there are motions to dismiss this case being heard this week, so things could change, but the judge in the court in New York has already indicated that it's very unlikely the case is going to be completely dismissed, because he's allowed it to go forward on its merits during the whole process so far, and he has granted an injunction to Leadenhall on the disposal of assets. Now, Leadenhall does not have a direct claim on any football assets in the 777 empire. It didn't lend to the clubs. It's not involved in them. However, the companies above the one owning the clubs made a guarantee to Leadenhall that they would be repaid in the event of a default. And this guarantee gives Leadenhall a claim over any asset in the business, not a direct one, an indirect one. And the judge agreed. So the judge has granted an injunction to Leadenhall against ACAP disposing of any assets. And Leadenhall will tell you, and have said in court quite openly, that their only concern here is that they get their money back, and they are claiming $609 million from 777, which cannot pay. Where it becomes a problem for ACAP and the football clubs is that under the terms of the injunction, in theory, no football club can be sold without the court's approval. The judge has said he will not give advice on any of these proposed transactions, that it's not his job to advise, and he has told Leadenhall that they have to bring a formal claim that any transaction is a breach of the injunction, and begin an adversarial process about it. So we are currently seeing that kind of play out with Everton, because Everton is in the throes of a takeover by the Friedkin Group. 777/ACAP have £200 million worth of loan money in the club. Right. And ACAP went to the court and said, the deal we have done to have this money paid back by the Friedkin Group, can we do it? Does it breach the injunction or not? The judge refused to rule, and we are now waiting to see what Leadenhall does next. If that transaction goes through without the court's approval, Leadenhall, I am told, even has the option to bring a contempt of court motion against not just ACAP but Friedkin for doing this. And that is an issue for the Everton takeover and for all of the other clubs. I think ACAP and all the other clubs are waiting to see if this court is going to rule that sales like this are a breach, because then it becomes very difficult for any of the clubs, including Genoa, to be sold or change ownership in any way. The issue for Everton and Friedkin is that the deal on the table being offered to ACAP to repay this 200 million only involves the repayment of 66 million of the 200, and the rest is only granted in preferred equity, which cannot be I forget the word, sorry, which cannot be activated, for want of a better word, for 7 years or until Friedkin leaves, and warrants, which could and would therefore give ACAP 10% of Everton. If you are Leadenhall, is that fair value? And that is where the court may have to decide, and that's why these things are an issue for Genoa and the other clubs too. I hope I explained that as simply as I could, because it's not easy to understand from the outside.
Very well, absolutely. It's a kind of complex matter. As you mentioned, it involves also the sale of Everton. You actually anticipated some of my question, and this is amazing, because in terms of cost time saving. It's amazing. So just to be concrete, try to be concrete. If Genoa has a buyer now, and even an agreement between the current ownership, actually the current managers of Genoa, and the buyer, there will be at least potentially a further, you are saying, a further obstacle to conclude the transaction. This is what you are saying.
Potentially, yes. The injunction means that any transaction that ACAP attempts involving an asset which belonged to 777 must go before the court for approval by Leadenhall and the judge, because Leadenhall is owed money which 777 can't pay back. That is the state of play. And there are many ways around that. And there are many reasons why Leadenhall may not or ever object to anything that happens to Genoa. It's just a potential outcome. If a buyer was to come forward with a good offer for Genoa, there is no guarantee that Leadenhall or the court would get in the way of that. It may be entirely okay for that to proceed and for Genoa to be sold, but there is a grey area here in this case, and that's why you cannot say for certain that Genoa can be sold at the moment, because the injunction does give the court the right to sign off any transaction like that. And that's all we can say right now. I can't say Genoa can't be sold, but I can't say that it can be either, unfortunately.
Exactly. Ale, if I can, I will try to make one more quick question, and I ask kindly ask Paul to be really brief on this one, given the time we are left. Basically, my question would be: as you know, we are having the meeting of the Nada. Yeah, now the terms is slipping my mind. The board meeting, shareholder meeting.
Shareholder meeting, yes.
Thank you. Shareholder meeting of Genoa, and the local newspaper are reporting that there will be this injection, as Ale already mentioned, of 40 million euros, which is fresh air for us in this moment. If you could assume or try to make an hypothesis regarding this, where this money will come from, meaning, can we safely assume that this is liquidity in the full availability of ACAP, or if we can ask you a leap of imagination, where do you think this could come from? Meaning, is it full liquidity of ACAP? Do you think this may mean an external source, a new investor, or what would be your assumption on this situation?
So with the greatest of respect to Genoa, I don't really understand what's in it for a new outside investor to suddenly pump 40 million euros into Genoa. The first question I would have is, what are they getting in return? If this is a gateway to a new ownership, that I can understand. But the feedback we had from people close to both 777 and ACAP was that Genoa is not high on the list of clubs that they actually want to sell, really. So, you may draw your own conclusions from that. However, ACAP is under pressure from insurance regulators in the United States, who have told it that it must reduce its exposure to 777 assets and that it cannot invest further in them, because that would raise its exposure. So ACAP insurers are not able at the moment to put 40 million euros of liquidity into any club, let alone Genoa. Obviously, ACAP is a holding company. If it wanted to do that at holding company level, I don't think there is anything that would stop it. But my question is, does ACAP have 40 million euros of liquidity to put into a football club? Particularly a football club that it doesn't want to run or own forever, which it is trying to dispose of.
Giving also, Paul, excuse me for interrupting you, giving also the situation of ACAP, which has very recently, a few days ago, has seen 3 of 5 subsidiaries basically stopped in their activity by the Ohio, I think, court. So this is even more strange, I would say.
Yes,
Yeah, and also, sorry, Paul, just for adding one element, this 40 million that were, I think, borrowed by the Burley, no, the Chelsea manager, with an interest. I don't know if this is true or not, of crazy 46%. So this is also something that happened when potentially ACAP could have put that money in Genoa easily, no, if it would have been possible. So there is a lot of gray and dark here, and I'm well. That's what is worrying me the most, I would say.
yes, the loan from GDA Luma was actually repayable at the end of last month, and the interest on it is so crippling that it was a problem for ACAB. We don't know what's happened to it yet, frankly. We don't know if it's been paid off, rolled over, or what has happened to it. And we also don't know what GDA Luma was offered in return for that money. Were they offered a lien over any of the football assets? Do they now have a claim here on anything, including Genoa? We don't know the answer to that question, but it's an interesting question to ask. Yes, 3 of the 5 insurers in the ACAP group have basically been told they need to stop writing any new business by the end of the year, and it's expected that the other 2 will be told to do the same in another state, South Carolina, which has also been, which also has concerns about the business. And as I said towards the beginning of this podcast, you then have a big US insurance giant who cannot do any new insurance business, and how is that business supposed to survive at that point?
Okay.
Clear.
I have I have a question which is more, let's say, an idea that I want to express, and also to hear your opinion on that, because Genoa, despite the challenges that you were telling us, and if you speak to each of the people in Genoa and the fans of Genoa, seems to have been managed locally relatively in an effective manner. The costs have been reduced. The marketing is doing very well. Also, they hired, in my opinion, and I don't think it's not in my opinion, a great sport director capable to bring very young talent and create value in increasing the value of these people that have been unluckily sold last summer. And what do you think about this? And in particularly, we discuss offline. What is your opinion about the CEO, which is a very controversial person in Genoa? As you probably know, there is a kind of quite heavy discussion between the CEO and the president. President is an old doctor, really supporting Genoa, and the CEO is Andres Blaskets. And I would like to hear your opinion on that, which is the opinion of somebody that studied all the investigate, but at the same time doesn't he is not involved emotionally in this kind of discussion between the two parties.
So Blasquez has managed to generate quite a lot of good PR and nice headlines for both himself and Genoa with what he says he has done for the club. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that everything is bad. I can see that there are certain improvements on the financial side. However, the bottom line here does not look great for Genoa. Firstly, if you look back, Blasquez himself was fined, and the club docked a point for financial mismanagement not so long ago. More recently, it had to beg for a haircut on its tax bill in front of an Italian court, which essentially found that the club was in a state of crisis. And if we'll know more when the accounts are finally published, but I think it's probably interesting that those have been delayed for so long. But Genoa has one of the highest debt to turnover ratios in the whole of Italian football, And what I hear is that much of its future income has already been factored out. And I think that may be an issue for potential buyers or investors in the club. Um, the last available figures, I think, were that Genoa's debt burden currently stands at 265 million euros, and its income is 117, I believe, the last accounts showed. And that to any outsider would smack of a business that cannot continue without further outside investment, basically. That's even before you get to any of the on pitch stuff. So I think Blasquez likes to paint a very rosy picture, but I think the reality is somewhat worse.
Okay, no, there was also this bond that was sold, this Tifosi, no? And I also, this was quite interesting from an external point of view, to see a company that pretend to have a billion of value asking 5 million euro for a project. Uh, yes, it could be fidelization, you say in English, I think, of the people with the team and so on. In fact, I don't know if you read that within really short time, this 5 million have been paid by people in Genoa. And Genoa is not it's not Milan, it's not the richest. It's like selling in Liverpool. No, I mean it's not London. And but fans, I know many of them that invested on that, which is very very interesting. Ivano, you have another question?
Maybe I can imagine we have very short time right now. I would be curious to ask, but I'm not sure Paul will be able to answer to this, but we can try. If he knows how much Blaskets is, let's say, autonomous in relationship with the ownership of Genoa. Obviously, there is a responsibility and a direct relationship is responsible. There are some obvious limitation in liquidity right now, which are obvious to everybody, even locally. But we would like to know, what do you think, if he's acting in an autonomous way, or he's still basically executing what he's receiving from the
Sure.
ownership?
Well, on paper, he is still an employee of 777 Partners. However, he's clearly currently working for ACAP, which is the business that controls all of the football operations. And this is the same for most of the other people who used to work in 777's football business as well. They are currently all either working on an advisory basis with ACAP or trying to find a way to bridge the gap between what's happened with 777 and new ownership for some of these clubs. So I would say the best way to explain it is that he essentially has a foot in both camps, and he is trying to guide Genoa to a better outcome. But
Okay.
it's ACAP that's calling the shots here, and I believe Blasquez, from what he has said publicly, knows it, and that's the assumption that he's operating under.
Okay, I have two more question, very quick ones. One is, if you had, and you don't have, I know it, a crystal ball, what do you think is going to happen?
Oh,
I know this is the worst question I could ask, but
all I will say is I genuinely believe that when this is all over, Genoa and the other football clubs which were once part of the 777 group will be in a better place. They will end up with an owner which can really move them forward. I genuinely believe that. But there may be some pain along the way before you get to that point.
okay, I like that. Thanks a lot. And the last question is something that many people ask. I know that your colleague Philip received an email as well. Probably you are aware of that. Many people from Genoa ask to investigate on Sampdoria, because what happened in Sampdoria and the way they were protected, saved, and now in the second division, despite having a huge amount of debt that been eliminated and cancelled by we don't know what. So we want to incentivize
Well,
to do that.
we know we're aware of the story, and it's another interesting one.
That's really really interesting, and
Yeah, watch this space. We'll see. Yeah.
happy to support if if required. No, I'm
You
joking.
have, you
I
have
don't
me
know.
now, Paul, on board. If you want, as you can see, and I'm
Okay.
sure it will be working for free.
No, no, absolutely, absolutely. I'm happy to pay money actually. The last thing is more a consideration about football in general. You know, and I want your opinion, and then we can close. You hear probably the news of yesterday that 2034 the World Cup of football will be in Saudi Arabia, which is, I believe, what you were telling us, and I was reacting emotionally about your love of football, Everton, and all you did. I think this is really something ugly, something terrible. And um, what do you think about that? Because also there, in terms of investigation, I expect
Mm.
to see something important, because that's something
The,
that is not explainable rationally.
the whole process with how World Cups are awarded has been so corrupt for years, and I think this one is. There are so many questions about how flawed this process has been. It's essentially been just waved through. Um, the scenes the other day when it was announced were just appalling, really, and ugly is probably the right word for it. Yes. I have no problem in principle with the World Cup going to a country in the Middle East. That's
No,
completely fine. I think there are people who will tell you that opposition to things like that in the West is down to a kind of racism. I have no problem at all with a Middle Eastern country like that hosting a World Cup. But come on, the process is just a joke. It's incredibly flawed. And unfortunately, I think football is trying to milk Saudi Arabian cash for as much as it can possibly get, and will do so until it disappears, in the same way that it's done with Chinese money,
Chinese.
Qatari
Yes.
money, whoever it is. It's the latest cash cow to milk, frankly, and that's
No,
not
and
interesting for anyone.
if you talk about Middle East or Africa, Middle East, there are plenty of country with a football tradition like Egypt, and if you go to Maghreb, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria. So I would support, a World Cup. I mean, in 2030 will be partially in Morocco, but again, like in Qatar, where there is no story, where there is no nothing, no tradition, they built stadiums that they are not used any longer. So this is something that is, for me, out of any logic. Anyway, Paul, thanks a lot. It was a huge pleasure to meet you also in person, and I hope we will stay in touch also during the next months, weeks, and as I told you, once the situation is finished, I really would like to invite you to Genoa to watch a game with us in Gradinata North, and
I'd love
enjoy the stadium, because it's something unique that, yeah, I believe also an English person would appreciate and
to.
admire, because I mean you have a beautiful stadium and fans, but Genoa is an practically an English team as well. So it's very very proud of these roots. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ivano and Andrea. Thanks for making this podcast perfect.
Thank you.